This is 4 with Sign On.
Hello, welcome again to Sign On. I'm Rachel Basticar-O'Neill. Our theme in this series is the deaf nation. One of the most important areas in the life of any nation is the education of its children. Today we look back at developments in deaf education, as they've been covered by our programmes over the years.
Little. Prince Barrett said, no.
I'm at the Royal School for the Deaf in Derby, where these children are being taught using a bilingual approach to education. The bilingual approach recognises the equal worth of British Sign Language, BSL, and English for deaf children. All of the staff sign, and there are deaf staff at almost every level. We'll be looking at their work later. But first, a reminder of school life 60 years ago, in the experience of one deaf man.
I was fond of maths. I kept winning things at maths because it was visual. I could see. I could add up. I won. I was top. Scripture and speech. I couldn't understand that. I failed at speech, you see. If I couldn't do speech, I had to practice and practice to learn to speak. If I didn't improve, I'd have to stop in again in the afternoon while the other boys were out playing football. I stayed in to learn to speak, and I hated that. The teacher would show me how to say the letters such as A and N by holding two fingers against my nose, holding my head for the high sounds, holding my stomach and saying ah. And then he'd wash his hands and put Dettol in a bowl, and put his fingers dipped in Dettol on my tongue. I didn't like that. I was really tired, and slowly my mouth would close. I bit his finger, and he smacked me on the arm with a ruler. He called in the headmaster, Wearmouth, and said, "Billy is poor at speech, and I have difficulty teaching him." And the head said, "Well, if he's absolutely impossible, we'll just have to put him in with the monkeys, all the little gesticulators." So he said, "You're going into Miss Cameron's class."
50 years after Billy Burt's experience, in 1984 we filmed at a traditional residential school. By then, teaching methods and communication systems had changed in many areas.
Donaldson School for the Deaf in Edinburgh was opened over 100 years ago. Originally a residential school, most of the pupils now travel daily, with only a few boarders from other parts of Scotland. Many hundreds of deaf people have been educated here, but most left school lagging behind hearing children of similar intelligence. For most of the last 100 years, the teaching here was almost exclusively by the spoken and written word. But there have been great changes in recent years. Headmaster John Miller.
Some years ago, we felt that the methods then in use were capable of improvement in the results that the children would obtain. So we decided to make the change to total communication after looking at the methods currently employed in schools for the deaf.
This teacher is using signed English. That's not the same as British Sign Language.
Pauline Jordan will go to camp in May, perhaps. If you go and write that news in your book...
Although the signs are often the same, they're used in English word order.
That's right. I worked with children some years ago using an oral-only way, and found that the children couldn't really follow what I was saying or understand what I was saying. Today, in this class, I feel the children do know exactly what I am talking about. The children in this class are now achieving a level of education in reading and writing and numeracy, which I should expect to see with children who are hearing in the same age group.
Preschool education for deaf children was also changing. While more parents were accepting sign language, many wanted their children to stay at home rather than go to a residential school. In 1986, we reported on one significant breakthrough in our film A Language for Ben. Ben Fletcher lived in the Yorkshire village of Denby Dale. His parents sent him to the local nursery school.
We had problems with the other children, their reaction to Ben. We had to explain to the children that Ben couldn't hear, and that we used our hands to tell Ben and show Ben, and explain to Ben things, because he couldn't hear us. No, because I'm going to help Christopher. You go get some bricks. Ben, at first, didn't like physical contact with any of the children, really, at all. He wanted a big space around him. Gradually, you know, he overcame that, and the children started to react to him pretty well.
As the year went on, the first year, I began to realise that, like me, the nursery staff were having difficulty communicating the sort of things that you want to communicate to a child of that age.
With the support of the head teacher, Ben's parents persuaded the local education authority to employ a deaf assistant in the nursery. Her job was not only to work with Ben, but to help his parents and the other staff to improve their signing skills.
I'm really very lucky to have this job, working with this little deaf boy. I find I like it very much because I can sign and communicate with him. I can express myself. I know how he feels because I felt the same when I was little.
A penguin!
How many penguins? 3 penguins, that's right. What about under the rug? What was under the rug?
Tortoise.
sort of. We thought it was Spot, but it wasn't.
I'm interested in the job because Ben is the only deaf child in a large group of hearing children. And I'm the same. I'm the only deaf person working with the teachers. I want to be equal to them, and in the same way, I want Ben to be equal to the hearing children.
For me, the most important thing is he's going to see a person who is proud. Perhaps that's a strange word to use, but I think it's the only one that's appropriate, is proud to be deaf. And I hope he grows up being proud to be deaf and being proud of his language.
Ben's parents had thought through the issues of language, self-esteem and identity that he needed to grow up as a whole person. He's now approaching 18 and preparing for his A-levels at a local college. Between nursery and college, Ben attended school in Leeds, where again he had full sign language support. After the break, we look at the educational changes that took place in Leeds in the 1980s. Okay, we're going to finish that now. 10 years ago, we reported on the educational changes taking place in Leeds. The local education authority abandoned the oral method and replaced it with total communication, an approach which soon evolved into what they now call sign bilingualism. They also closed down the old special school and partially hearing units and replaced them with a system of resource schools, employing both communication support workers and, most radically, deaf instructors.
Little.
I help with the deaf children. I have 3 deaf children in this class, and I help them with any communication problems they have. I help and support them. The teacher sometimes misunderstands what the child is saying, so then I help the teacher and tell her that the child didn't say that. The teacher might expect the deaf child to come out with a long sentence, but I know that a certain facial expression with just 1 or 2 signs is enough to express the full meaning. I can understand them straight away, so I can help both the teacher and the child.
Met. That right? Met. Yes, you can. Met.
The concept of a resource school is very different, and it reflects a difference in thinking in special education, that we move towards the idea of a unit, a specialist unit attached to a mainstream school, that actually caters for example, for deaf children, but where services like ours offer resources to the school, people and materials, to enable the school to cater for the children. So rather than focusing on the children and supporting them, we focus on the school as a whole and enable the school to provide for the children.
It's so important, communication. If the teacher asks something and the child doesn't understand, I can explain the question, and I can tell just by looking at their faces when they're not understanding, so I can help them straight away.
Where is the sun? Where's the sun? Many deaf children in Leeds come from ethnic minorities. So the education department provided support for families who were not only having to learn to sign, but where English was not the first language in the home.
Are you having a signing class this morning?
I do it the sign language,
Yes. Can I ask you if you can see a difference in Camran since the other deaf children have been here?
He's improved much more. He seems to be much more confident.
It's very important, particularly for the ethnic minority deaf children, that during their education they do come across representatives of the community. When the children were at school at Elmeet or in our partially hearing units, this didn't happen. So it's important that at Brudenell that the children do see Asian people working in the school, coming in and out of the school, as well as deaf people.
शागिर्द का नाम Anne, शागिर्द का नाम Umi, शागिर्द का नाम Una.
The Asian women's signing class is still going strong in Leeds, and so are the deaf instructors. There are now 17 of them, including some former pupils. Here at Derby, the Royal School for the Deaf is one of the remaining special schools, which offer an alternative to mainstreaming. As well as deaf support workers, the RSD also has several deaf teachers. Janice Silo has just been appointed the school's bilingual coordinator.
There are two languages developing side by side. We're also trying to develop self-respect and self-esteem. That's all important to me. Bilingual education is really all about relevancy, getting on the right wavelength.
When I was small, I couldn't do English at all. I started at this school when I was 11, and now I'm learning English. I understand what it means. It's been a big help.
I'm really happy here. It's given me what I need. Where I was before, people used to go on about speaking English all the time. But here they give you BSL and SSE. Bilingualism is much better.
Well, I can speak too, and the school gives me BSL and SSC as well, so I can switch between the two of them. Sometimes I make mistakes, but I can manage both of them okay.
The school's really good. It's teaching me lots of things. Maths, English, science. I'm learning a lot, but especially maths. I'm very happy with what the school's giving me. There's nothing I dislike at all. I'm happy here.
It's good. I'm learning a lot. Things have improved and it's nice. It's easier for me. There's a lot of good work.
I enjoy it here. It's better than the hearing school. I couldn't understand what they were talking about there because I was deaf. But when I came here, I was really knocked out because it's a deaf school. It's much better here.
I think bilingual education is nothing if deaf people are not involved. Hearing people's contribution is very important. That goes without saying. But to focus on the deaf side, deaf people give a positive self-image. They show deaf children that they can achieve similar things.
The job I'd like when I grow up is to be a vet, because I like looking after animals. I love animals. I'd like to help them, so I hope the school will help me to do that.
I want to work with cars. The school's teaching me a lot about cars. So once I've learned as much as I can here, I'd like to go to college and learn how to work with cars. I'd like to set up my own car repair business. I'd love that.
I really want to improve my English because it's important for computer programming. I'm hoping to learn all about computers and IT. I need to learn maths and everything too because it's really useful as well.
I'm doing English and maths because I want to learn enough to go to university. Counting, mixing things, weights and measures and so on. I want to understand everything so that I can do well.
What I try to achieve with deaf children is exactly the same as hearing children, to give them the curriculum in sign language so that they can expect to acquire a wide experience of the world. To take that in and also to learn to argue, debate and to disagree, because the ability to disagree is important to me.
The bilingual approach used here at Derby and in Leeds is a relatively recent development, though it's spreading. Across the country, educational and communication methods still vary enormously. And of course, most deaf children are born to hearing parents with no previous knowledge of deafness. The organisation, with the difficult task of trying to support the interests of all deaf children and their parents, no matter what methods of communication they favour, whether signing or oral, is the National Deaf Children's Society. Chief Executive Susan Daniels.
There's much more focus now on parents' rights. Parents are given the opportunity to say what they think about the education of their children. The views of children are now taken into account as well. Before, there was none of that. One of the biggest problems depends on where the parents and children live. It's a question of choice. The NDCS's view is that it's important to have a continuum of educational provision, including bilingualism, sign language and the oral method. Choice is very important, but at the moment there isn't enough choice. Another of the big problems is access to speech and language therapy. Also, we don't yet have enough research information about the educational attainments of deaf children. And finally, we need more deaf awareness in mainstream teaching. That's missing at the moment. But hopefully the government's Green Paper will address that issue. The problem with the government's Green Paper, Excellence for All Children, is it has a very narrow definition of integration. In some ways, it's arguing that integration is the best way for all children with special needs. The NDCS feels we need a wider definition of integration. It's important to look at the communication needs of the children, which are different from disabled children. For some, integration is a good way, but special schools have an important place in the education of deaf children as well. It all comes back to communication. That's the key.
If there is a deaf nation, then deaf children are its future. And education remains probably the biggest single concern for the deaf nation.
Do we have enough trained deaf staff? Do we have enough hearing staff as well with the right skills? And deaf staff with the right skills? We need people who are bilingual, not monolingual.
I feel we need more deaf people involved in education. Really, that's the answer. We need more deaf teachers, and the NDCS has organised a seminar to try and encourage deaf people into education. We need more learning assistants who are deaf. We need more school governors who are deaf. That's the answer for more deaf people to become involved in the education system. I feel that's the way forward for the future.
Next week we look at the language of the deaf nation, British Sign Language, and we attend the biggest social event in the deaf calendar, along with 2,000 other deaf people, the BDA Congress in Torquay. Join us for that.